What, if any, evidence did you have of fentanyl in Ms. Benning's system prior to her admission at the ED?
I don't have any evidence that she had fentanyl in her system prior to arriving at the emergency department.
And was there specific testing of the urine sample from 2259 that was tested specifically for fentanyl?
Yes, ma'am.
And that was negative, is that correct?
Yes, ma'am.
And then that first blood that was taken at 2231, there was no fentanyl detected, but fentanyl, the specific drug of fentanyl was not part of that test. Can you describe what was tested and kind of what results were not present that give an indication that there was also no fentanyl in her blood?
Well, when this commonly happens when we have someone who we believe has taken too much of a substance. They go to the hospital, they are unresponsive, and some testing is done on the urine to try to help direct the blood testing. In this case, we have an initial urine sample that is positive for cocaine and metabolites, no other drugs, no fentanyl. So when I have this limited amount of blood to work with, less than 2 milliliters, I really want to direct the testing so I can catch anything that's there, maybe that wasn't tested for already. In discussion with the toxicologist at Vanderbilt who had followed her for days and been trying to figure out what drugs might be in her system, we decided on testing for cocaine and metabolites since it was positive for cocaine initially and metabolites, and I wanted to catch that ethylene methyl ester with it, knowing that the cocaine could break down. I tested for designer opioids. So these are the fentanyls that have the added chemical groups. So you can see it here on the list. There's furanol fentanyl and acryl fentanyl and all of these designer fentanyls, and all of those were negative, as well as one of the things that's been mentioned previously in this case, the 4-ANPP, which can be a precursor to fentanyl, it could also be a metabolite. That was also negative, and the testing reporting limit was very low to try to catch anything that was there. It was negative. And then I think that was the bulk of my testing on that, and then we did the additional testing on the fetal liver tissue.
And the testing on the fetal liver tissue, you've testified about that before, but was there any fentanyl associated with that?
No.
And that's even after treatment in the hospital, correct?
Correct.
And the levels of the subsequent test, which you referenced working with a toxicologist at Vanderbilt, is that Dr. Clary?
Yes, ma'am.
And so the subsequent testing of blood and urine, those results, were those results consistent with her receiving it as medication in the hospital?
Yes, ma'am.
And again, the cause of death is acute cocaine toxicity, correct?
That's correct.
And there is no evidence that there was fentanyl in her system upon admission at the emergency department.
That's correct.
There was testimony by one of the defense experts that it was an assumption to say that Ms. Benning ingested something orally. Can you describe, you determined that it was ingested, and that is oral ingestion. Can you explain how you were able to determine that, and if it makes sense that it was not orally ingested?
When we look at one of the toxicology textbooks or toxicology books that I refer to rather regularly, and it gets updated on a regular basis with all new studies, the studies have shown kind of the average, what are the ranges and the averages for the amounts of cocaine in cocaine intoxications that have been detected and tested, both in obviously controlled studies. You know how much they've taken and how much the amounts will be, but even in ones that have been treated in the hospital, whether they've died or not. And the levels that we see in Ms. Benning's blood are pretty much in oral ingestions. So your nasal insufflation or snorting, your IV injections, you don't have this level in those sorts of cases. You really see it in the thousands like this when they've ingested it orally.
Which, that's part of that oral ingestion is because that level is so high. Is that correct?
That's correct.
But also we have that vomit from the comforter that also tested positive for cocaine.
That's true.
And when EMTs see the pink vomit on her mouth, but they also find her face down with her face on the comforter and the vomit stain is under her mouth, that is part of the evidence that you considered in determining it was oral ingestion.
Yes, ma'am.
And then we also have a witness who testified that Ms. Benning said to Blaise Taylor, "What did you put in my drink? I knew my drink tasted funny." And you considered that, is that right?
I did.
Dr. Lindsay also made a comment that you determined that the cocaine all spontaneously hydrolyzed in the tube. That was the clear cap tube without the preservative. Does that make sense to you? And can you explain kind of what happened with the clear cap tube and then it hydrolyzed? Is that something that is commonly seen?
Yes. So that's something we kind of talked about before, how typically when we draw blood at the time of autopsy, we want to put it in a gray top tube that has that sodium fluoride to stop those enzymes from breaking down the cocaine, because it can continue to break down even after the person is deceased while it's still sitting there in their body and while it's sitting in the tube if you don't have something to stop those enzymes. We had a clear top tube which didn't have that, so the blood continues to break down. I've seen this on many occasions with hospital blood samples with maybe a prolonged time after death before autopsy, and so that's why we want to look for that ethylene methyl ester. I found a study that was published back in the 90s, so this has been kind of a known thing for quite some time when you're looking at post-mortem levels of cocaine, that if you want an accurate estimate of the cocaine or accurate number of nanograms per milliliter of cocaine that's in the blood at the time of death, then you want to add the cocaine and the ethylene methyl ester together, because that was all parent cocaine initially.
And this is not something that just you know, but is that something that the other forensic pathologist at the medical examiner's office, that is just a normal practice of how you would estimate the parent cocaine?
Yes.
And Dr. Bergolari at Vanderbilt, y'all discussed that, and she in fact agreed with you. Is that correct?
I don't remember if we talked about the specific numbers after the fact, but we did talk a lot about the testing and what tests would be most appropriate to order and what we were worried about for her cause of death.
And Dr. Bergolari also was aware of the cocaine on the comforter, and y'all spoke at length about if it was oral ingestion and the numbers and if everything lined up. And Dr. Bergolari was in agreement.
I think we did talk about that because we had a meeting with several of us, and we discussed aspects of the case.
Which there were several meetings where everybody was meeting to kind of discuss what the levels were and make sure that everybody was in agreement of kind of what happened and what the test showed. During those meetings, it came up where it was the lawyers were asking, could you determine how much cocaine was ingested? And the result of that was all of the toxicologists saying no.
That's correct. So the problem is, I can't remember, I may have mentioned this before, when you buy medication at the store, it's tested. There's, quality standards. You know that when you buy that over-the-counter medication like ibuprofen or Tylenol, you know how much is in each pill because it's been standardized, it's been tested, it's passed, those sorts of testing. With